Okay, part two.
Yes.
Movement of the planets.
Yes, regarding will Kamala be president?
Right.
So, what does it mean by movements of planets? Leslie?
Okay. So what happens is that when you look at the chart, you want to pull the chart up?
Yes, I'll go ahead and do that.
What we do is we follow the the planets continue to move in the sky. As you know, the moon continues to move throughout its sign and moves into another sign. It's just the planets continue to move around. And this is like a clock. That's why it's called horary. And the moon is the fastest moving of all the planets. So that's the one we're going to look at first. And we actually look at the movements in order. So literally, we look at the moon as it progresses until it moves out of its sign. Once a planet moves out of sign, it's off the game board. It's no longer part of the answer to the question. And we start with the moon because it's so quick, but we'll see that actually there's another planet that comes in really fast after it. So the moon starts out with a sextile to the north node. That's this guy down here that looks like a headset. And the north node is our destiny. And so this is really positive. We think, oh, a sextile is a positive aspect. The moon represents Kamala. The north node represents her destiny. Yeah, we can look at this as a very, very good start to her having a very positive public image. And then, like, within literally 2 minutes, was actually a little longer than that, but it's 2 degrees. So it's maybe a couple of hours. Mars down here in the third house of communication will trine, which is the most positive aspect of all, Pluto up here in the 11th house, and that's up above the moon. That's it. That's Pluto. And Pluto represents power, and it's in the house of friends. And and probably there's some connection to the military too, since Mars rules the military. And there's this trine. And so what we're going to see is a lot of powerful people are going to support Kamala. And that's in the background. She's going to eventually get lots of money from these people. And we're going to see that right away as soon as she's actually comes into the position of being, winning the position at the Democratic National Committee, that she's going to have money instantly. But that's what's building up behind the scenes is this Mars trine Pluto. Power behind her. Then the next thing we do is we look at the next moves of the moon. And the moon's going to travel very rapidly in quick succession of opposing Venus over here in the sixth house, and then squaring, which is very negative, Uranus, which is money and bad news. And then it's going to follow by opposing Mercury. And what happens when the moon goes from one planet to the next, it drags with it the energy that it has from each one. So it's going to take the energy from opposing Venus, which is love or money, and it's going to then bring that energy to negative news, Uranus square, very negative news. And then it's going to take that energy to opposing Mercury, which is her husband. Because Mercury, as we mentioned before, rules the seventh house, which is in Virgo, and the seventh house cusp over here at 3 o'clock, 3 o'clock on the clock. Yep, that on the cusp there is Virgo, and that's ruled by Mercury in the sixth house. Okay, so what we're going to see in the future, this is forewarning us. We're going to see bad news about money. We're going to see the sixth house rules jobs. We're going to see bad news about jobs. And we're going to see bad news about her husband. And that is going to happen. Um, and that's it really for the moon. There's just one little thing left of the moon, which is that it semi-sextiles Neptune. Neptune is over here in the first house. We know that Neptune represents propaganda in this chart, and the moon semi-sextiling it is connected to either news about money or it's going to be about health. And it's interesting, we keep coming back to health. A semi-sextile is not an aspect we usually use in horary. I use it to look at either money, as if one were to go from Aries to Taurus, which is a semi-sextile, which Taurus ruling money. So I look at it to see if there's going to be something to do with money. And it's not either good or bad. I see it as neutral, just that there's going to be something to do with money, or I look at it as being Aries connected back to Pisces, and on the Pisces, it's hospitals, mental health, things like that. So it could be something connected to, um, just in general, I would call it health or mental health. So we want to keep that just in mind, that there's a minor little foreshadowing of that at that point in time. And then the moon moves out of its sign. And then we look to see what planets come next. And what comes next, we
There's some negative communication with Uranus.
that's wait, hold on a second. We're going to see actually two minor aspects coming next. Oh, I see what you're talking about. Hold on a sec. Yeah, I wanted to talk about the fact before the moon went out of sign about something really, really funny. Okay. If we look at Mercury and Venus in the sixth house, okay, they're in the sign of Leo. And Leo, and the sixth house is over here at what would be between 3 a.m. or 3 o'clock and 4 o'clock. Okay. So Mercury and Venus. Venus is the one that looks like a female sign, and Mercury looks like a female sign with a hat on it. And they're both in Leo. And Leo is ruled by the sun, and the sun is in the fifth house. And the fifth house rules children and acting. And I think it's really funny that later on, this is like foreshadowing the fact that Kamala is going to take on accents, different accents, like she's acting, trying to act like to be one of the people that she's with. So she has a black accent, a Hispanic accent, a Jamaican accent, and that's really that whole sun in the fifth house ruling her Venus. And then we also know that her husband has children. And she just recently came out with the fact that, well, she had so much trouble having to raise children. His kids are like 18 and, older. She didn't raise his children. That's another one of those amazing word salad
Mhm.
evasion tactics. But here again, we see this strange influence of the fifth house screwing her up when it comes to being in communication again.
Yeah.
And this is her acting. And when we actually get to her final birth chart, I'm actually going to be pointing out the fact that there's a strong possibility that she's actually acting through a lot of this. But that is something that's pretty profoundly deep, and we're going to get into that later.
Mhm.
But just
She's
keep that in mind, that there's this whole acting thing going on with her.
she's like a chameleon.
Yes, yes, she is exactly like a chameleon. Exactly. Okay, so let's go to the bigger stuff that's going on with the other planets that don't move so quickly.
Yeah.
So
So
the first thing we have is a minor aspect between Mercury and it going to in conjunct Neptune, which is our propaganda. And that in conjuncts means that there's going to have to be an adjustment made. between her husband and the propaganda behind him.
In the image of what that means.
Yep. And then the next thing we have is Venus in conjunct Saturn. Venus in conjunct Saturn. We know that Saturn is that Damocles sword hanging over this whole chart, as it's Saturn, the great malefic, conjunct her ascendant. And Venus in conjunct it means that, again, there's going to have to be some kind of adjustment made to protect her from that sword dropping on her precipitously. And yeah, we see that because on August 1st, Mars down here has a positive aspect to the North Node of Destiny. And since Mars had just had an aspect to Pluto, which is very powerful people, Pluto is power in her 11th house of friends. And Mars just had this wonderfully trine aspect to Pluto. Mars is going to carry that energy over to sextiling the North Node of Destiny, and which is in her first house, which represents her. And so we're going to see a smoothing over of some bad stuff that's about to happen. And that's August 1st. And August 2nd, the bad stuff starts to happen. On August 2nd, or Venus, this Venus right here in the sixth house, which represents money, because Venus rules money, and the job market, sixth house is jobs, is going to square Uranus right here that cusps both the second house of money and the third house of communication. And we know it's going to be negative communication because Uranus is in its fall, F-A-L-L, not like the season, but actually falling. And what happens on August 2nd is that the government makes an announcement that the job growth was only 114,000, but the Dow Jones had predicted it to be 185,000. It is way lower than the Dow Jones prediction. And then the second thing that happened was that the unemployment rate rose to 4.3%, and it exceeded all 69 estimates that were made in under Bloomberg's, the people that make assessments for Bloomberg. It was not supposed to go over 4%. 4% seems to be this big marker that the unemployment rate should never go up over 4%. And it went to 4.3%. And it hasn't done that in a long time. So this was the bad news that came out with on August 2nd, the same day. It came out the exact same day that Venus, jobs and money, squared Uranus. Bad news. It's amazing. And the result of that was that over the weekend, the stock market in Japan went plummeting, and that had happened on a Friday. August 2nd was a Friday. Come Monday morning, the very first thing that happened was that the NASDAQ dropped 6% in seconds. Now, August 3rd, Saturday, in between August 2nd and August 5th, when the stock market went crashing, that's when the Times of India came out with what we were talking about. The husband, where the Times of India said that he had cheated on his first wife. Kamala's husband had cheated on his first wife and had got with the nanny and had gotten the nanny pregnant. That news came out August 3rd. So now we see Mercury, which is in the sixth house, and that being, we had already seen the foreshadowing of that. Remember, I said that we needed to see that something bad was going to happen with news with her husband. Well, there it was. Came out August 3rd.
And this might have been a distraction.
Yeah, it could have been. It could have been or it could be that I mean, which one's distracting which one? The stock market crash distracting the husband, or the husband distracting the stock market crash, or the
Yes.
two of them kind of burning each other out. Um, but then on August 4th, which was Sunday, Venus in conjuncts Neptune. And Neptune again is our propaganda. And Venus in conjunct means an adjustment had to be made. And what did come out, I believe it came out on August 5th, was that the husband came out and said, yes, I did cheat on my first wife, but that was a long time ago, and I love Kamala, and I'm devoted husband to her. So there was your adjustment that was made about the situation on August 4th.
Mhm.
And so then the next big bundle of stuff that happens is August 14th, August 15th. August 14th, we have the planet Mars in the third house communication conjuncts Jupiter. And Jupiter is the main person, the main planet that represents the person and the question. It is Pisces is on the ascendant, and it's ruled by Jupiter. So that's Kamala. That Jupiter is Kamala, and it's in the house of communication, and it's in its detriment, which we'll get into in a minute. Um, did we talk about that on the first one, or did we miss that on the first part?
I don't believe we talked about it.
Did we? I can't remember.
Very little.
Oh, okay. Well, let me just stop for a second and explain something here. Let's take a good look at the third house of communication before we go any further. Jupiter is in it. That's the one that looks like a big four, the blue four, and the third house of communication. And it's in its detriment because it is opposing. I think we may have talked about this, but let's talk about it again. It's opposing Sagittarius that it rules. And whenever you are in the opposite sign of a planet that you rule, that planet's in detriment, which means it's detrimental. And Mars is the lesser malefic. I think we did talk about this. And Uranus is in Taurus, opposite the Scorpio, where it would be exalted. So it's in fall. So now you have Mars, the lesser malefic, coming together with Jupiter, which is Kamala. And what I interpret this as is people who are figuring out what to do with her are having a war between themselves. I see this as internal strife. I see this as, what are we going to do with her? How are we going to put her out in public? If should we make her president? Should we not make her president? Is there anyone else? I think this was all internal warring and sparring as to who's going to run it and what's going to happen. And then the next thing that happens on August 15th is then Mars, the same Mars, squares Saturn. And Saturn is up, and that's that Damocles sword that hangs over this whole situation that could at any moment come down and crash on her head. And Mars squares a really negative aspect, is basically saying that that fighting over what to do with Kamala probably got pretty strong and pretty heated. And what was going on at this point in time? Well, this was just before they were going to do the Democratic National Convention. And then the Democratic National Convention decides, yeah, they're going to go with Kamala. And on August 20th, right after, Jupiter, which is Kamala, it squares Saturn, the Damocles sword over her head. And what I would say at this point was, it's come out in the open now. The struggle that Mars connected with Jupiter is no longer behind the scenes. I interpret it as it's now out in the open, and basically Kamala opens her mouth, which is Jupiter, which is her primary representative, and it's in the third house of communication. And basically, every time she talks, she triggers, which is a square to Saturn, her demise. She triggers each time chipping away at her bid for becoming president. She adds strength to Saturn being conjunct that ascendant and wiping her out. On September 2nd, Mars, continuing through the chart, squares Neptune. That's propaganda. The internal strife is now warring over when and how the propaganda should be handled. I think that at this point, she'd been out in the public sufficiently for them to realize that they had more problems connected to her. And this is all like behind the scenes stuff going on, but it must have been really, really tough on them trying to figure out what to do with her.
And she
Uh,
struggles with the teleprompters whenever she's
oh
in.
yeah. Yeah. And that's interesting too, because Mars rules the military, but it also rules the internet. And it also rules, we see it as ruling computers, that when one works with computers. Now, Uranus can maybe rule the esoteric programming of computers, but Mars rules the nuts and bolts of working with them. So Mars squaring Saturn would, which is conjunct or ascendant, would definitely be problems with teleprompters. That's interesting.
It is.
Anyway, um,
So there needed to be an adjustment to the government.
yeah, that's the final and minor aspect before Mars moves out of sign. Mars, Mars in conjuncts Pluto, which has moved into Capricorn because it's gone retrograde. Right here on this chart, it was at 0 degrees Aquarius, but by September 4th, Pluto has moved backwards into Capricorn, and Capricorn rules the government. And it rules the people that are in power in the government, as Pluto is power. And Mars makes it in conjunct to Pluto at that point, which means an adjustment has to be made with the government. And Capricorn also represents the 10th house of the presidency. So at that point, they may have already been trying to figure out an adjustment, a way to get rid of Kamala, and when to do it and how to do it. They may have already figured out. I mean, these guys are not stupid. It would take a lot longer for the public to figure it out, and they would keep trying to not have that happen. But right there, you're looking at the people, and I'm not talking about the people with money that are willing to give it to her. I'm talking about the people who are actually the puppet masters in the government. Because at that point, Pluto is real power, and it's moved to Capricorn, which is the real government, or, well, that which thinks it's the real government and likes to act like it's the real government. And that would be battle there. And an inconjunct is a big adjustment that has to be made. Okay. And then Mars goes out of sign and it's off the game board. And then there's one last aspect that's major.
Mhm. Yeah. When does this happen in real time?
Okay. Good question. It doesn't happen until December 24th. And that one last major aspect that happens not until December 24th is Jupiter, which is her major indicator. It's the one that rules her ascendant. And it is going to square Saturn again. And it's going to be through being retrograde because Jupiter's going to turn around and go backwards. And Saturn is still going backwards. Saturn's retrograde. And when they both hit 14 degrees, Jupiter hits backwards 14 degrees Gemini, and Saturn hits backwards 14 degrees Pisces. And interestingly, that's going to be at the same time it is that Saturn actually hits the ascendant. So there's this major connection. Jupiter rules the ascendant, And Saturn is going to back into the fact that it's going to be sitting on the ascendant and they're going to square each other. And I think that that is going to be when it becomes publicly known that Kamala's out of the race, December 24th. I don't know how she's going to go out of the race. Um,
Okay.
there are different possibilities as how they'll take her out of the race. One of the ways could be that we keep having, as I keep pointing out, all this stuff to do with health. Uh, the sixth house is not only jobs, but it's also the house of health. Her husband is in the house of health.
Mhm. Yeah.
I mean, one thing that's a possibility is she could suddenly say, to save face, that she has to step down because her husband's really ill and she wants to take care of him, and she's going to make the sacrifice of giving up being president by doing that. That's just one simple option. I have no, I mean, there could be a plague. There could be anything that happens. I'm not sure yet what
She
it
could
is.
have to go to jail.
Yeah, because we have Moon in the house of the 12th house of jail. And we're going to see in her, uh, well, let me put it this way. Pluto is actually not off the game board. It's just that all the other planets will have moved off the game board. So it's the only one left. And there will no longer be any aspects to Pluto. But if you were to stay with Pluto, it's only at 29 degrees at this point. Capricorn is going to go back direct, and it's going to go back into Aquarius, and it's going to keep going forward, and it's going to go into the 12th house of jails. And it's going to take 20 years to cross the 12th house of jail. And so you have to ask yourself, is that something that's a possibility in the background that could be facing Kamala, that she's going to face 20 years of jail time? And we do see one minor aspect that on June 1st, 2025, Jupiter, which is Kamala, semi-sextiles Uranus. Jupiter's Kamala, and it's still in detriment as it's still in Gemini, because now it's at 28 degrees Gemini because it's only moved forward to there. And Uranus has now also moved to 28 degrees, still in Taurus, still in fall. And we know that Uranus is still bad news. And the question is, the semi-sextile represents money or health issues. And so this minor little aspect, could we see it again as something to do with health? Maybe the health of her husband, maybe her health. And it will be some sort of bad news, but that's it. That's it. Those are the two possibilities, that one minor aspect and on June 1st between Jupiter and Uranus, which most people who study astrology would not even bother to look at that aspect. And then, of course, the fact that Pluto is still on the game board and could actually be crossing through the house of jail for 20 years.
Mhm.
And when we look at her personal chart, we will see why this whole horary chart actually explains a lot of stuff that's in her personal chart, that we would be scratching our heads saying, you know, it looks like this is going to happen and that's going to happen, but how is that possible? Well, the answer as to how it's possible is the fact that every time she opens her mouth, negative stuff comes out.
Mhm.
That she's this master of word salad, and she's an adept at word salad. It is astounding how well she does it. I was thinking about this, and when we look at her personal chart, we're going to see she's not an idiot. She's actually very smart.
Mhm.
And that's, and I didn't even look at her personal chart until after I finished analyzing this one. And when I looked at her personal chart, it blew my mind of how much it's connected to this horary chart and how much the two of them explain each other. So we should actually go on and do that personal chart and
Mhm. Yeah, before we do that, what as we think about the election,
oh right, yeah.
it may not happen, or there might be some sort of redirection where they hold off and there's not going to be any announcement of who is president.
That's true. Or they may decide to say that, you know, Trump won overwhelmingly, so they're going to try to attack Trump and say that he cheated, and then it's going to drag it out.
That's
Or there may be something that literally stops us from voting at all on the election day, and there's a pause, which is what Juan O'Savin keeps saying. Um,
when that happens, we could be thinking of maybe a blackout, or, as Leslie brought up, a plague or some sort of scare or fear tactic that they put out there to
yeah,
prevent us from going to the polls to vote.
yeah. I mean, something is going to happen because I did actually, well, that's a chart we should do later in the week. I did a horary question months ago, and I asked if Trump was going to win the election in November.
Mhm.
And I got back a horary that said, you can't even read this chart. This chart is completely does not exist. And I thought, oh my God, is Trump going to be assassinated? So I looked ahead and I saw that he had a lot of aspects that were very active after November. So I said, nope, he's not going to be assassinated. Well, of course, thank God he wasn't. But so then I did a chart for that I'm going to talk about later in this week about the election. And it shows some really wild stuff happening. And I'm not sure I even understand it all yet, but it shows a lot of different possibilities of crazy stuff happening. So we'll
Okay,
take a look at that.
I look forward to that. Mhm.
Okay, so we should move on to Kamala's private chart because it's mind-blowing. It's it shows some stuff that's really pretty scary, and I think stuff that may have happened to her as a child, and it shows her path through life of how she managed to make it to become powerful, like being the mistress of Willie Brown. And it shows everything in her chart. And I think that people are going to find that way more interesting even than this horary question, but basically just says what we all keep seeing, that communication is going to bring her down. Okay,
Okay,
so let's move on to
thanks,
that one.
everyone. We will go
Let's,
on to the next one.
okay, let me unstop recording.